This month, two women were killed by their partners. And what's truly unsettling isn't just the ending, it's how familiar the beginning sounds, because when the details came out shortly after, we found out it wasn't sudden, it wasn't random, it wasn't out of nowhere. I mean, there were prayer calls, there were warning signs, there was a pattern before the escalation. And if we're being honest, those patterns hide in plain sight. They look like everyday relationship moments. You see posts on social media, everything looks dandy on the outside until they don't. Welcome to Family and Beyond. I'm Bim Delalu, family lawyer, qualified mediator, and legal coach. In my work, I've sat across from smart, capable people who didn't understand the dynamic of the cycle they were in. And so they will say things like, I was constantly doubting my instincts. They would say they weren't sure if the situation was bad enough, that they were being perhaps too sensitive, or if they were the ones making things hard. Coercive control is a pattern, an intentional pattern over time where one person uses a mix of tactics to dominate another person's day-to-day life. It can include isolation, intimidation, monitoring, humiliation, financial restriction, threats, sometimes violence, sometimes no visible violence at all, but always the same result: less room to move. Today, we're launching season 2, and this entire season is built around 3 pillars you need to reclaim your life: clarity, choices, and consequences. Starting episode 1 with the shame trap, how coercive control steals clarity, because you cannot make a choice until you can see clearly. Let me describe something. You're in a relationship, nothing looks obviously wrong, but you start explaining yourself more than usual. You find that you're avoiding certain topics to avoid arguments. You think twice before saying certain things. You replay conversations in your head over and over again, trying to figure out what you said wrong that perhaps led to silence. You feel tense, but you can't point to why. And if you try to explain it to someone, it sounds small. It sounds petty. So you tell yourself it's not that bad. Maybe I'm just overreacting. Maybe this is just how relationships are meant to be. And that's where it starts. Because in these dynamics, confusion is not communication. In fact, confusion is intended to assert control. And the first thing it takes from you is clarity. Not your intelligence, not your strength, your clarity, your ability to trust your own read of reality. It doesn't arrive all at once. It builds slowly, quietly. It sounds like, why do you need to see this person? Why do you need to talk to that person? I'm trying to help you. You're being too sensitive. You cannot take a joke. That's not what I said. You're making things up. And nothing on its own feels like enough to react to. But if you put all of this together, it changes how you think. Now I want to say something here, because this part matters. Not all coercive control starts with someone thinking, I want to control another human being. Sometimes it starts with what they learned. If someone was raised in a home where silence was punishment, conflict meant withdrawal, endurance was expected, and dysfunction was normalized, that becomes their baseline in any relationship. So for some people, especially men, who were never taught emotional regulation, control can start to feel like stability. In fact, authority, being in charge. And then withdrawal can feel like strength. And then over time, what should feel like connection will begin to look like a struggle, like sacrifice and imbalance. So when they have a partner who pushes back or asks questions, sets boundaries, tells them they don't agree with a certain decision, they see it as confrontation. They see it as a threat. And the response from this is usually escalation, abuse, violence. Let me be clear. That would explain a pattern, but it does not excuse it. Accountability should always stay exactly where it belongs. Now, I want to talk about something that keeps people stuck longer than they ever thought possible: social conditioning and shaming. Some of the most powerful chains in coercive control aren't physical, they are social. So shame could sound like, oh, don't be that person. You're repeating the same thing. You're going to be a statistic. You're failing at this relationship and it's going to be your fault. And sometimes it's even sharper. Like, Someone saying, look at your parents, look at your family. You have a history of this. Now you're doing the same thing. It's in you. It's you. You are the problem. Let me be crystal clear. That line is not insight. It's not kindness. It is a weapon. It takes your history, your tenderness, your loyalty, your fear of repeating pain, and then turns it into a cage. And what's worse, coercive control often feeds on community judgment. If the people around you minimize the behavior or blame you or tell you to keep it quiet, the abuser doesn't even have to invent those words. They just simply reuse it. This is where I need to say something carefully. For women, the pressure can be reinforced by other women. Sometimes older stereotypes. Sometimes, you hear things like, I stayed. You don't know what I went through. I think you should stay. It's not that bad. You hear things like, a good woman makes it work. That doesn't mean women cause abuse. It means the script gets passed down and enforced, just like tradition. For men, on the other hand, this can be a different pressure. So pressure to be a provider, to be in control, to assert authority, to be a leader, to not express emotion, to never look weak, to never admit fear or shame. And if someone believes control equals competence, they may lash out when they feel they are failing or losing what they perceive to be control. That explains a pathway. It does not excuse a single act. Again, accountability stays with the person who chooses coercion or violence. Now, let's connect this back to clarity. Coercive control often shows up as 1,000 small adjustments you see yourself making. So they start adapting. They start minimizing. I don't think they meant it. I think I caused it. I think it's the way I said it. I think I should have done this instead. And maybe that could have been avoided. They start hoping. They're trying to stabilize something unstable. And slowly their choices shrink, not because they're weak, but because they're surviving. And for the longest time, the law didn't fully capture this because the law looks for events. What happened when it happened? But coercive control isn't about one moment. It happens over time. But that is changing. We are now seeing recognition globally, and here the patterns of control are abuse. And that matters because once something is named, it becomes harder to dismiss because you can put your finger on it. But here's what most people don't understand. Living is not always the safest when you are in this kind of dynamic. In fact, it can be the most dangerous time to live once you have that clarity. That's why this is not just about awareness. There is also strategy. Because when we talk about choices, we have to be honest, they are often shaped by things that are important, like money, housing, children. I'm going to say this. Coercive control clearly doesn't just affect the relationship. It affects your parenting outcomes, your financial position, your legal standing, and even decisions you haven't thought about yet. Like who has access to your assets? Who's going to take care of, important things in your life, documents, your future? What does it look like? So this season, we're going to go through the 3 C's. We are not skimming the surface. We are going to name what's been happening. We are going to talk about real choices, not ideal ones, and we're going to unpack consequences so you can move with clarity while time is still on your side. So if you take nothing else from today, take this. If you're feeling confused, if you're constantly second guessing yourself, that is not who you are. That's what this pattern does. And for shame will have you believing you are the problem. But shame is just noise. It's not the truth. It is just noise. So if this feels familiar, talk to someone, get a good support system. You do not have to carry this alone. I'm excited about this season. Thank you for joining me today. Until the next episode.